All right, you guys, this is chapter 8. Chapter 8 is titled Calculate Doses of Oral and Parenteral Liquid Medication. And this is basically lecture 1 for chapter 8. And again, as I begin each lecture, I remind you guys that there's really no point in you looking over these videos until you have already reviewed the PowerPoint for the chapter that this lecture is associated with. You have read the chapter and you have read the lecture notes that's provided to you. All right. So with that assumption, I am assuming that you have already done that. So when I start practicing these problems and solving these problems, you have an idea of what it is that I am talking about. Well, with chapter 8 is very similar to chapter 6 and chapter 7. The only difference is instead of us calculating tablets and capsules, which is solid oral medications, we're now going to calculate liquid medications, which means that your dose will be in the liquid form. And your units for your liquid form are like milliliters and liters and cups and ounces and so on. Now, technically, when you are calculating a dose of a liquid medication, remember, a dose is how much medication you're taking in one sitting. You are calculating that to be in a milliliter form, all right? Which means that if it's an oral medication, you're going to have to give the patient some utensils to use in order for them to take that medication. So if you're following me, turn to page 243. And at the very bottom of page 243, it talks about calculation of oral liquid medications. And it begins to talk about the very last sentence says these medications may be administered with oral syringes that are available in a 1 milliliter, 5 milliliter, 10 milliliter size, and that's figure 8-1. So when it comes to oral liquid medications, you can give a patient an oral syringe or a medication cup. If you turn to page 244, figure that 8-2 gives you an example of a typical medication cup. And it's also available, these utensils for liquid medications are available as either a dropper, it can be a measuring spoon, or it can even be something that's very new, you don't see it often in pharmacies, pacifiers, which are used to give the liquid medication to pediatric patients, like infants, only infants. But one of the things I want you guys to keep in mind that when you calculate a dose, you have to determine what utensil will you dispense to the patient when calculating that dose. So, for example, if you calculate a dose for a patient to be 10 milliliters and below, you're going to use an oral syringe. And you're going to have to show the volume that patient should be taking on these practice problems. If you calculate a dose of medication to be 15 milliliters and above, if it's 15 milliliters and above, you're going to have to use a medication cup. All right? So let's just go ahead and get started with just some examples. So if you turn to page 245 and look at the bottom of the page, it says example 8-1. I am going to solve this problem like we've been solving the problems from this point on. I'm going to interpret the order. We're going to calculate the dose if the question asks for us to calculate just the dose. And we're also going to provide the prescription label. But in addition to that, when calculating the dose, you're going to have to provide the utensil the dispensing utensil that you're going to have to give to the patient and show the volume of the dose on that particular dispensing tool. So in on page 245, example 8-1, it says a physician orders amoxicillin 500 milligram capsules. Let me restart this. A physician orders amoxicillin 500 milligram oral suspension. The medication available is amoxicillin 250 milligram per 5 milliliter. How much medication would be administered to the patient for a single dose? All right. Granted, I know it doesn't tell you to interpret the order or provide the prescription label, but as you go through this chapter, it's going to ask for that anyway, so we're going to do it for all our problems, all right? So I've written it out. I've told you that the RX is asking for amoxicillin 500 milligrams oral suspension. It tells you that the stock medication is amoxicillin 250 milligrams per 5 milliliter. They want you to just calculate the dose. Well, right now, I want us to interpret the order. So when I interpret this order to read, I interpret this order to say amoxicillin 500 milligram oral suspension. All right. Now I want you to calculate the dose. All right. Again, when calculating the dose, you either are going to use one of the two methods, the ratio proportion method or the formula method. So I'm going to use the ratio proportion method, all right, where I'm going to take the medication that we have in stock, put it on the left-hand side, and you're going to put the order on the right-hand side. So what do I mean by that? So the stock medication, it says the stock medication comes how? 250 milligram per 5 milliliter. The prescription order is asking for what? 500 milligrams. Well, that goes on the right hand side, but remember the units on the right hand side have got to match the units on the left hand side. So if milligrams is at the top on the left hand side, that means milligrams has got to be on the top on the right hand side, because of course we have an equal sign there, and you're going to put an X. So now you can just solve the problem where you take 250 milligrams times X equals 500 times 5. You're going to calculate that. 500 milligrams times 5 is what? I think that's what, 2,500 milligrams per milliliter. To get X by itself, you're going to divide 250 milligrams on both sides. I think I have an extra 0 right there. Going to divide 250 milligrams on both sides. As you can see, 250 milligrams crosses out on the left-hand side, leaving you with X. Milligrams cross out on the right-hand side, leaving you with milliliters. So that means you're going to need what? 10 milliliters for the dose. So that's what I calculate the dose for this patient is 10 milliliters. Furthermore, if the order was complete, I could provide the prescription label, but I can't provide the prescription label because it doesn't provide me a frequency. But moving forward, you're going to have to provide to me, you're going to have to provide the dispensing tool that is going to be equivalent to the amount of milliliters that they need for their dose. So based off of what I told you, an oral syringe is only used if the dose is 10 milliliters or below, and a medication cup is only used for 15 milliliters and above. So my question is, what syringe size would you use? Because of course the dose is 10 milliliters. The dose is 10 milliliters. So we know that we're going to have to use an oral syringe, but you're going to use an oral syringe size that will take up the entire quantity of that dose or close to it. So remember, on page 243 it states that oral syringes come in a 1 milliliter, 5 milliliter, and 10 milliliter. Again, oral syringes come in 1 milliliter, 5 milliliter, and 10 milliliter. You sometimes can get a 3 milliliter as well. So my question to you is, what size syringe would you use? Would you use a 5, a 1, a 3, or a 10? If you said 10 milliliters, you are correct. If you said 10 milliliters, you are correct. So what you guys are going to do is that you're going to show me in detail. You are going to show me on a 10 milliliter syringe, you are going to show the volume for that syringe. On that syringe, the volume on that syringe. I'm going to use another page so you can see it. But on here, I have a 10 milliliter syringe here. So I have a 10 milliliter syringe here. All right. I'm going to use this syringe. On this 10 milliliter syringe here, I am going to show the volume for that dose for that patient. So what you're going to do is that you are going to draw a line at the 10 milliliters. See, I'm drawing a line at the 10 milliliters, and you're going to shade in above that line. You're going to shade in for the volume. So basically, you're indicating to me that the patient is to take, I drew the line at 10 milliliters, and I drew the line at 10 milliliters, and I have shaded in the volume above that 10 milliliter line, which means that that's the volume that the patient is to take. They're supposed to take a total of what? 10 milliliters for that dose. All right, let's do another problem. I'll use a different document so you guys don't have to watch me try to erase. Alrighty. Let's go ahead and let's just try to just go to our practice problems, because the examples are very minimal. So let's go ahead and start with our practice problems. So I want you guys to start, turn to page 250, and we're going to start with practice problems A. Practice problems A, the instructions are that they want us to calculate the following medication orders and answer the questions listed. If there is a dispensing device shown, draw the medication of the correct volume, show your calculations. Remember to use the method of calculation and version that is most comfortable for you, meaning that when you calculate the dose, you either are going to use the formula method or the ratio proportion method. Choose one conversion system and continue using it when doing your drug calculations. So, starting with number one. Number one, practice problems A on page 250. It says the order medication is diclofenac suspension, 100 milligrams POBID. That is what the doctor has ordered. What you have in stock, your available medication, it shows a label here. So this is new. Now it's giving you the label. It's not writing it in words. All right. So again, the way the problem is presented to you may be different, but the process is still the same. So if I look at this particular medication label, it says Diapen, and it tells me it's 62.5 milligrams per 5 milliliters. All right, it's an oral suspension. First thing it wants me to do is it wants me to do what? Interpret the order. So when you interpret the order, you read the order as you see it, as it's given to you. You read it as you see it. So I read it as for it to say diclofenac suspension, 100 milligrams by mouth twice a day. That is what I read the order to say. All right, diclofenac. Oh, jeez. All right, diclofenac suspension, 100 milligrams by mouth twice a day. The next thing it wants us to do is it wants us to do what? It's asking for the volume of medication for the dose, meaning they want you to just calculate the dose. When calculating the dose, you can use the formula method or the ratio proportion method. It depends on what you want to use. Formula method is comfortable to me, so I'm going to use the formula method where I take dose order over dose available and multiply by the quantity. So my dose ordered is what? 100 milligrams. My dose available, the availability of the drug, if you look on that label, it says 62.5 milligrams, and you are going to multiply that by the quantity associated to the 62.5 milligrams. If you look at that label, it says that the strength of the medication is 62.5 milligrams per 5 milliliters. That means the quantity is 5 milliliters. So you're going to multiply that by 5 milliliters because 5 milliliters is the quantity associated to the 62.5 milligrams. And then you're just going to solve the problem. 100 divided by 62.5 times 5 is, your answer should have been 8 milliliters. That is how much medication is needed per dose, 8 milliliters per dose. That should be your answer. Well, this is not on here, but I want you guys to do it anyway. I want you to provide the prescription label. Remember, the prescription label is basically you translating these SID codes into a full sentence for the patient to understand. The prescription label is just the instructions in a full sentence for the patient to understand. So it will read, and this particular medication, I'm going to look at it because we want to make sure that it's not a pediatric medication because the verb would be different. But it looks like it is just a medication that can be given to adults. So it is going to read, take 8 milliliters by mouth twice a day. Take 8 milliliters by mouth twice a day. That is what the prescription label would read. Take 8 milliliters by mouth twice a day. Well, I want you to show me on the correct dispensing tool that 8 milliliter dose. So again, are you going to use an oral syringe or a medication cup? If you said medication cup, you are incorrect because you only use a medication cup if it's 15 milliliters and above required for the dose. If you said oral syringe, you are correct because the rule of thumb is that we use an oral syringe if the dose volume is 10 milliliters and below. So in this case, the dose volume is 10 milliliters, is below 10 milliliters. So I am going to use one of my oral syringes. Remember, I told you the sizes. It comes in either a 1 milliliter, a 3 milliliter, a 5 milliliter, or a 10 milliliter. All right. So you would use what size? You're going to use the size that is going to basically take up the volume that is needed. It's going to provide this volume of supply. So we're going to use a 10 milliliter syringe. So, because I'm going to use a 10 milliliter syringe, you're going to have to show me 8 milliliters on this 10 milliliter syringe. So you're going to look for the 8. As you can see, at the very top of the syringe, you have a 1. Then there's a 2. You have a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You're going to draw your line at 8 milliliters and you are going to shade above the line, the 8 milliliter line. This is the dose that is needed for practice problem 1. Although it does not have all these extra steps in practice problems 1, I wanted you guys to do it anyway because as we move further in the chapter, it's going to have it broken down where you're going to have to interpret the order, calculate the volume. You may even have to calculate the daily volume or the volume needed for the entire prescription. You're going to have to provide the prescription label. You're going to have to provide all of those things. So this is why I'm asking you to do that step by step. All right? Alrighty. Let's do another one. Let's do number 2. All right. So number two. Alrighty. Number 2 reads. This is on page 251. But number 2 reads, your medication order is phenobarbital, elixir, 60 milligrams, PO, QID. What you have in stock, if you look at that label, you have phenobarbital, and right below the name, that phenobarbital elixir, right below it, it says, it's in small writing, the strength is 20 milligram per 5 milliliters. So what that means is that for every 5 milliliters, there's 20 milligrams. All right. So the very first thing you guys need to do is that it's asking for us to interpret the order. So in order to do that, I am going to read the order as I see it. So I'm just reading the order and translating for what I read it for, what I see it to say. So I'm going to say phenobarbital elixir, 60 milligrams by mouth, 4 times a day. That is what I read. That's what I interpret the order to say. That's what I read for the order to say. Next thing is that they want you to calculate the dose. All right. So in order to calculate the dose, you're either going to use the formula method or you're going to use the ratio proportion method. So I'm going to use the ratio proportion method, where you take what you have in stock equals what the prescription is asking. So what we have in stock, again, the label reads 20 milligrams per 5 milliliters. What the order is asking, if I read back up to the order, is asking for 60 milligrams. That 60 milligrams goes at the top because milligrams is the unit that's at the top left. On the left hand side, you're going to put X at the bottom. So when I solve this problem, I'm just going to crisscross multiply. So that's 20 milligrams times X equal 60 times 5 is 300 milligrams per milliliter. To get X by itself, I'm going to divide 20 milligrams on both sides. As you can see, 20 milligrams crosses out on the left hand side, leaving me with X. And I'm going to divide, 300 divided by 20 gives you what? 15 milliliters, because milligrams crosses out on the right hand side. So next thing they want you to do is they want you to show the volume using one of the dispensing tools. All right. Well, I'm not going to use an oral syringe. I'm going to use what? A medication cup. Because my dose is 15 milliliters and above. So what I'm going to do for my medication cup, I am going to look for 15 milliliters. I see the 15 milliliters. I'm going to draw a line at 15 milliliters. And I am going to shade in for the volume below the line. This is indicating 15 milliliters. All right. All right. I'm sorry, you guys. I'm going back and forth through screen to screen. All right, so the next thing I want you guys to do is not on here, but I want you guys to provide the RX label based off of your calculations and your interpretation of the order. So it will read, again, this medication is not for a child, so I'm not going to use the verb give, but I am going to say take. And in this case, 15 milliliters is equivalent to 1 tablespoon. So I'm going to say take 1 tablespoon. But in parentheses, I'm going to put 15 milliliters. The reason why I do that is because some patients lose their utensils. You know, their whether we're giving them an oral syringe or whether we're giving them a medication cup. Even though we strongly tell them not to use any household utensils because it's not equivalent, it's off just a little, there are going to be some patients that lose the utensils that we give them. So just in case, you always have to provide both the the household measurement and the metric measurement if it's equivalent to something. So I would say take 1 tablespoon, in parentheses I'll put 15 milliliters, and my frequency is by mouth, 4 times a day. All right. So I want you guys to do the remaining of these practice problems, number 3, starting on page 252, all the way to number 20, which ends on page 261. If you get stuck on any, please feel free to send me an email, and I will help you guys out. All right, that is the end of part 1 of this chapter 8 lecture.